Hello, watchers and listeners. I'm Alaric. Soon you'll see and hear my friend Ben. Together we are Sacred Assumptions. This is Session 1, Episode 4, for those following along in this session.
To 13 through 25.
Do you want to cover 11 and 12?
This will be the next part for go between 1 Peter 2, 11 to 25. And so that'll be the next episode. Welcome to the next episode. This is 1 Peter 2, 11 through 25. Nailed it.
You did until you said that.
Yeah. So for this episode, going through 1 Peter 2, 11 through 25 is more of behaviors that we have in the world.
Right.
And so we have in the verse 11, we have, "Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct amongst the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may say your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation."
So what do you think that he's referring to by passions?
So what these passions are, definitely the part where it says which wage war against your souls. So my thought is kind of pride, power, greed, sexual morality. Something that's
Does it? I don't recall. Does it tend to say that power is a problem?
I'm thinking of something that your flesh wants a lot. It's something where
Greed is an actual issue. Pride is an actual issue. But is power an actual issue?
I'm thinking of probably unjust power or domination power, where you want to dominate somebody else.
Okay.
Not like, probably that is the way I'm thinking of it. I'm not thinking of like, seats of power and authority which are given, but more of, hey, like, I could beat you up if you don't give me this thing. So you have some sort of position strength that allows you to take.
So doing it in that way for a negative reason.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Because I mean, like, first, when I read passions, I mean, to me, passions isn't automatically a negative thing. But the way they're talking about it here, it does sound negative. So it implies that the passions that they're referring to are bad.
Oh. I'm also guessing it's also referring to like drunkenness and there where it feeds your body. Your body wants something and it wants something wrong.
Right. Yeah.
And in those time periods, you would be definitely...
Which I guess whenever it says which wage war against your soul, would suggest that... Because there are certain passions that are actually not bad. But if it's waging war against your soul, then obviously there's whatever you're interested in or whatever you have a passion for, if it's waging war against your soul, then if it's a problem for your soul, then it's automatically... It would be a bad passion.
Mm-hmm.
So...
Yeah, so probably we would probably think passion as, I have a passion for cars, I have a passion for electronics, I have a passion for dogs. And so we think, those aren't so bad, but this is referring to the passions of the flesh and has something as you said, your soul. So it's trying to corrupt your soul, and right there.
Right.
And for Peter, as he writes this, as saying you're sojourners and exiles, the passions of the flesh are things here on earth, I'd say. There are things on earth that are apart from God that people will go after. And so Peter is probably talking to people who see pagans and Gentile worship, like the part where they are having orgies, getting drunk, having fits of rage, and everybody's saying that's normal. And Peter's like, no, that's not normal. Like, that's not what God wants. That sort of thing will, harm your soul.
So when it says, keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. What do you think that is referring to by that they would glorify you, glorify God on the day of visitation? Because the way whenever it says keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak evil against you, or when they speak against you as evildoers, the fact that they're speaking against you as evildoers suggests that just because you're being honorable doesn't mean that they see it as honorable.
Yeah.
And so if they don't see it that way, but yet when the day of God's visitation comes, they will see your good deeds and glorify God for it.
Yeah. So for it right there, the idea, I think, is a bit there is a conduct you should have with unbelievers that he said honorable, which is making sure they kind of are treated with worthiness. And so if you are
the Gentiles,
so you aren't shaming them, you aren't treating them less. You are, and you're not, when you're dealing with them, you're not seeking to give them the worst deal possible. You want to still give the Gentiles the best deal possible.
So are you assuming that, are you suggesting that that the Gentiles would not, if Christians were to behave that way towards the Gentiles would not see that as honorable? So I get a cultural thing, but is that what you're getting at? Is that it could be due to their culture, that they may not see that the same way that the Christians would see it? Or is that not what you're getting at?
Oh, what I'm thinking of, so you have people who are Christian, and you have the people who are Gentiles, and they're in a cult. They will deal all in themselves in this cult a certain way, which they view as honorable. And then they have a way of treating people outside in a dishonorable way. And then when other people treat them back the same way, they're like, you don't give me honor right here, even though I'm part of this group right here. For Christians, it should be that the way that you treat other people in your group, you should also treat people outside of that group in the same honor.
Right.
And so, and the people who are in this cult who are hey, like this might say like the way that you're treating me is not honorable in the way that like I'm expecting to be treated in my group and culture, but they won't, they don't, they treat themselves in that way. But if there's somebody's an outsider, they treat them differently. But when they see they've treated you differently, and then they see that the way that you're treating them is the same way that you treat everybody else in an honorable way. Mm-hmm. Like you're not, is a way of kind of putting them to shame because your conduct is not trying to be dishonorable to them or is evil. You're trying to do good to them. You aren't thinking them less because you are treated, so they don't see that part right there where it's like, hey, like you're in your Christian group and you treat them everybody so nicely, you give them the discounts and such. Why don't I get like the discounts? And then like the same discounts they get, you get. It's like,
okay, so I think that we're also looking at this in two different ways. Because I see this as when keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, I'm getting the impression that that during that time they will be speaking to them. They will see it as evil regardless, even if how the Christians are behaving towards them should be considered honorable. That's not how the Gentiles would see it regardless. But once Jesus comes, it says that once God comes on the day of visitation, that as if they move forward or move ahead in time. So the when they speak evil against you is in the moment, and the day of visitation is in the future. Mm-hmm. And so I think that at least that's the way it seems to me. Like there's like a time period, there's a timeline that you're dealing with there, that they will not see it as that you'll be honorable towards them, but they will not see it that way. But they will eventually see it that way. And so I'm wondering also if what's going to happen is that they will not see it as honorable just because that's not how they view things. But once God comes and judges, or he just like, they can't deny him after that. They also can't deny what is actually good and what is actually evil. And so it's not that they will repent or anything like that, but that once they see it, God will be glorified because they'll see, oh, what they did was actually good despite the fact that we hated it. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if that's what they're saying, is that will glorify God, is that when they had seen your good deeds, that they may see your good deeds and glorify God. That it's more like, when on the day God comes, that they won't be able to deny it they won't be able to deny the goodness in it, and that will glorify God. Mm. That's the idea I'm getting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm getting it a bit differently, because when I do it, I think of a friend of mine that I would consider being like, that's like not the kindest things to say. I don't think this ideology is good to have. It possibly makes you think in a different way to treat people poorly. But for it, when he would step up for people who are poor to help them financially, he would also spend time to feed the poor and the homeless. I'm like, okay, there is something more to it that you can have, even though I don't agree with all that you're saying. By these actions that you're having, that I'm seeing, I can't like argue in this way, because there is a part that you're seeking the betterment of people who are less fortunate.
But wouldn't that be the Christian speaking wouldn't that be reverse, that the Christians were speaking well of the Gentiles in those situations?
So no, this is for the person who was a believer that I was talking about. But the idea is that
You had a believer and a non-believer, correct?
no, I had a believer, and I thought some things were saying a bit things too harsh. Ideology is like a bit mean to people.
Oh, okay. So
And
there's two different people that you're talking about, right?
no, there's just one person.
Oh, okay. I totally misunderstood what you're talking about.
I'm referring to one person that had that, where I was like, okay, he's behaving
Mm-hmm.
like saying these things like through interactions and such. But I also was seeing that he had this other side to him where he's trying to grow in his faith, and he has where he's feeding the hungry and poor. He's helping those in need financially. And it was like, okay, that like there is like something more about it that I can't speak ill about it because he's doing all these things right here. There is something more to it, to him right there, and that's God working in him.
Right. But
that's the part where I'm glorifying God for him doing that.
Right, but you're not a Gentile. Well, I mean, you're not, when they're referring to a Gentile, I'm assuming they're referring to someone who's not a believer.
Yeah. So, and I would say that probably from what said in conduct, a person who's a non-believer would look at that and be like, you're so mean, you're so hateful. But if you look at other actions he's taking in the background, you're like, okay, there's something more than just this right here. This is the part where God is working in his life.
So are you saying that they're seeing two different sides of the person, but they won't be able to, but they will end up speaking well of him when God comes?
I would say, yeah, when God comes, they'll be able to speak well of him because they're like, oh, I did not know you were doing this.
So you take it as when they speak evil against you as evildoers, you think that they're actually being evil, but then there's a side of them that they won't be able to deny that was actually good.
I would say not as evildoers. They will call you evildoers. They will view it as hateful and such. People would say, oh, like a person that's a non-believer will be like, you're an evildoer. You're spreading hate. But when they look back at your deeds, they'll be like, this is not what I'm picturing.
Okay, I see what you're talking. Okay, so you're saying that at that present time, whenever they're doing the honorable thing, they will see it as evil. But when God comes, they will look back at it and be like, okay, it was actually good.
Yes.
Okay, I got you.
Mm-hmm.
So we're pretty much saying the same thing. Yeah, because I was looking at it as like they see it as evil, but once God comes, they can't deny that it's good.
Oh. Or they can't, when God comes, they will see the good works that they're doing and be like, oh, there was good works that I was not seeing. Or I blinded myself to only see what was evil. Or I didn't blind myself to see what is evil. I blinded myself and called it evil because it was not, I was in darkness.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess I wouldn't take this as there are certain things that they couldn't see before, that there are certain things hidden from them. Mm-hmm. I guess the way I'm thinking of hidden from them means that they actually didn't witness it. Mm-hmm. And so, it makes it sound like they witnessed it all, but there's a point where they change their tune on whether or not is actually evil or not. There was nothing that was actually hidden. Like, oh, okay, I didn't see this side of you. No, they did see it all. But there's a point where they called it evil. Then there's the next point where they call it, okay, I can't deny that this was good because God's here, and he's making sure that everyone understands where they stand with stuff. He's making clear what is good and evil. And so I can no longer deny. I can no longer call them an evildoer. So the fact that I'm calling them what they're doing good glorifies God because God's there and things can't be denied at that point. Mm-hmm. It's glorifying to Him because it shows just how powerful or intense He is, that once you actually do see Him, there's no denying it. You could have chosen every which way to look at before, but now that you're actually confronted with Him, there's no denying it, and that there glorifies God.
I think I'm seeing it a little bit differently.
I understand that. I'm saying that's I think that what I'm getting at is that the way you're looking at it, I think that, to me, I don't see it fully lining up with how this seems to be playing out. But it tells me that we are looking at this in two different ways.
Yeah, I'm
looking at this as more of a timeline, and well, it makes it sound like you were suggesting that it's
more of the character. I'm trying to go with the character
of the person
of the believer, that it'll be perceived as evil, but there is that the believer is doing good, and eventually the evil deal the Gentile unbeliever will see what is good and then glorify God because of what he's doing good.
When you say that he'll see what is good, do you mean that he will finally see it as good, or he will have seen something he hadn't seen before?
So he'll see something that possibly he hasn't seen before. To be like, I'm thinking in those cultures, to be like, they'll be like, why aren't you making offerings to Apollo? Like, that is evil if you're not making offerings to Apollo. We haven't had the rains. And you'd be like, no, I am going out to, like, water the fields. It's a poor analogy. You'd be like,
Are you trying to say that it's not that it's so much so that they will end up seeing it, then more so they will recognize it for what it is?
Yeah, they'll recognize for what it is. Or they will see... they'll see practically what you're abstaining from, that you're doing other good things, or what you're abstaining from is actually good. Or in a case, they will say, trying to think where people would have said something is wrong. My idea is like slavery, is that Christians during the abolitionist time period were like, hey, slavery is wrong because we are dehumanizing them because we're doing slavery based on race. Mm-hmm. And those are what the believers were doing. They were having like this argument such of slavery, and people who would be like an unbeliever would be like, they're arguing about slavery, that's evil, that's wrong, why are they even having this debate? And the fact is, they had to have that debate. And so you had the believers who were like, hey, this slavery based off of race is wrong. And like, they would probably call Christians and believers during that time period as evil because of that there was slavery during that time. But if they looked deeper, they would see that believers were pushing for slavery like this is wrong.
They're looking deeper.
Yeah, if they look deeper, they see the good deeds. And then they'd be like, oh, we can glorify God because these believers were doing such a good deed because they saw that God did not like it, and so they could glorify it.
So, do you think that if they, before God were to come, or God on the day of visitation, that if they had seen that before then, that they had seen that deeper thing before then they would have seen that as good? Is that what you're getting at, or not?
I see. Part of me either goes like God on the day of visitation is either when they believe or when Jesus comes back.
When they believe?
So
when the Gentile ends up believing?
Yeah.
Okay, I see. So you see it as that they're referring to, it's possible that once they become a Christian, then they'll actually realize what was going on. Or when God comes back and presents himself to them, they can't deny it.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
That's probably the confusion. Right there.
I didn't see it that way, but I could see based off of that outlook that they would eventually see it, that there's something I was missing here if I had understood this deeper. Granted, it would also have to do with I would have to even believe that what you believed was true about Jesus, and so once I believe that, then I do have a different understanding of the whole thing. And at that point, you do see it as good, and you appreciate it. Whereas I would say on the day of visitation, when God comes and they're confronted with it, they can't deny that it's good, but they don't appreciate it. They just have to tolerate it. Just like, well, crap. So
we're going to be nice to you, and you're going to like it even if you don't like it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then now we're going to the next section of be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be the emperor as supreme or to governors as sent by him, to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor.
You know what's interesting about this? This 13 through 17, I guess, is actually giving us instructions based off an assumption that we don't tend to hold today.
That to obey every human institution.
It's more than that. It has to do with. It says you're obeying them, whether they're emperors or supreme or governors, so that they will punish or governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and praise those who do good. For this is the will of God. And so typically we say to be subject to these institutions regardless of whether or not they do this. And Paul is assuming they are doing this.
So the idea right now is that government is evil. Right now is the mindset of that now.
That's not what's going on in this moment.
Yeah.
In this moment, he's saying that the governor, all these people are intended, that he has put them in there to punish those who do evil and praise those who do good. And it says this is the will of God. So he's making an assumption that they're doing that.
Yeah. For it, because
usually whenever we talk about this stuff, because we're always saying, you need to be subject to them, whether or not they're doing good and evil. and he's making the assumption that they are doing. We will say this whether or not they are punishing evil and praising the good, and he's making the assumption that they are doing that. We're usually like, we do it. We be subject to them, whether or not they're doing good or evil, unless they're asking us to do something that is against God.
Mm-hmm.
But Paul here in this moment is assuming that they're doing that stuff, and that's when he's telling us to be subject to them.
Yeah. And I think about in the past where this verse was used by kings all the time to be like, hey, like, obey me, because like God has ordained this.
Mm-hmm.
And seems to be that possibly the connotation is that they are following what God's will is.
Mm-hmm.
But the kings and such and the rulers of the past would have thought that they are doing God's will, like God has given them his will and they get to decide what God's will is. And how they lived and decided things. And I think for that, there's a connotation of we should probably start off with the presumption, hey, there are the human institutions, emperors, and the governors, people for us would be like president down to the agencies and police and such would be something that we should listen and to obey right there, because we are to assume that they're here to do good. We should start with that assumption right there. And the people who are in those positions should have the assumptions that they are called to deal out God's will. They are not to be God's will, but to deal out what God's will. And so they have to check with what God's will is. They have a responsibility in that way. There will be a way of accounted for to that upon them to be like, did you carry out the will of God?
Mm-hmm.
Right there.
So you're saying that the gist of what you're saying is that he's saying that you should just assume that they're going to be doing this.
Assume that they're going to be doing this, and then from that, for this is the will of God, that they are going to do it. Because I'm also thinking of like Cyrus, who is an unbeliever, and like Nebuchadnezzar, like they did stuff that was cruel and mean, but it was the will of God that he was going to use those kingdoms to punish Israel in the Old Testament for their idolatry and sin.
Mm-hmm.
And so for it, that was the will of God, for God to use those kings over there to punish Israel. And those kings were not all good. And so for it, God will also use kings and rulers who are not good to carry out his will. And it might be something that we don't see yet, but the king can still do evil.
What if it's a bit more obvious that they are doing evil and not praising good?
So
Like it's not, you're not gonna be able to assume. You wouldn't be assuming that they are just doing good. It's just like they're making it blatant. You know what they're doing. You know what's going on.
Yeah, that's for it. You would probably have to figure out in your situation, definitely prayer to God to be, is this my calling to be here to endure this, to show what's right? Or is this sign for me to go and preach, live elsewhere to make sure the gospel is spread out there? And for the person that goes is to make sure that you still obey God in the new place that you're at. Like, so this is the part where I think of like that would be like a persecution, such where believers then leave and then bring the gospel and share wherever they go. That's the part of like where the government is like doing blatant evil and declaring that they're doing stuff that's wrong. Like one is to move out and then share the gospel there, and then other part here is like live that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. I think right there is in your, if that's happening, that you are supposed to do good even in the times that it is being evil.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I find it interesting that Paul is assuming when you can't, when it's obvious that rulers aren't always praising good and punishing evil. It's that's you can't. I mean, that's even pointed out in the Old Testament and other places that this is what's happening. And so for him to assume that that's happening, to me would suggest that maybe there's a little bit of a different meaning to what he's talking about than just submit, like regardless. It would be one thing if he just said, submit to them because God put them in that position, but because he gets specific with for they're there to punish evil and do good or praise good, that was like, okay, well now you're making an assumption about how they're behaving. So as if this is when we are to be subject to them whenever they are doing this. Mm-hmm. Because that's why God put them there. But if they're not doing that, is that an indication of, okay, maybe we can be more hesitant on whether or not we're going to be subject to them because they're not actually doing what it's called out to do?
I put it, it feels like, or it's like where they are doing good, like obey them. I haven't looked at the parts in scripture where it says if like the rulers and such are doing evil. But the only thing I can think of is the parts in Israel's history in the Old Testament, the nation of Israel, when the kings were doing evil, like another person, God would rise up a new king to like get rid of the king that was doing evil. So I'm thinking of when like Solomon died, when the kingdom was split, that's because God was not finding what Solomon's son was doing was good. And so part of the kingdom was pulled away from him. And then there was a bunch of other kings that would be doing stuff evil, and then God would be like, hey, general over here, go kill your king right there. And so there is moments of where the king is doing wrong or evil, that I do say from that time that it's like the part where you possibly do stand up to evil right there. But
There's an interesting other situation with that, which had to do with David and Saul, where David was going to be king. Saul had been being wicked, meaning he was trying to kill David and he shouldn't be doing that. And that there was a battle that was being fought, and then someone found Saul, and I think he was on David's side, and so he decided to take matters into his own hands and kill Saul. He had been evil. It was clear he was evil. He was disobeying God. But because he was anointed, David had the guy who killed him put to death, because you don't mess with God's anointed. Which would be interesting against this, because it was clear that he was not doing good.
oh,
But yet whenever the guy chose to take matters into his own hand, David had him killed. Because, like, for instance, David wasn't going to kill him because he had the option to. And honestly, to some extent, the way you read, whenever you read about the moment where he's fixing to kill Saul, or he's at least
capable.
Huh?
You mean David capable, or that person that
David in a cave, that he had, I think, considered it perhaps, but then just decided to cut a part of his robe to let him know where let him know I could have done this, and then he even feels guilty about that. It almost seems like, because the Holy Spirit left Saul, I think it makes it sound like the Spirit of God went over to David. Yeah. And so whenever David did that, whenever David cut the robe, he even felt guilty about that. And so it actually seemed like after that is where he had more of a clear distinction of, you don't kill God's anointed people, or God's anointed. And so, whenever whenever the other guy decided to take matters into his own hands, because Saul had been evil, that he decided to kill him just because he was God's anointed. David said, okay, well, since you killed God's anointed, you don't do that, I'm going to have you put to death. And it seems like he got that, he had a stronger inclination of that because of the feeling he got just from cutting that rope. I could be wrong about that, but that's the impression I got. So I find that interesting with this, because also what you're talking about with how whenever they were trying to kill off kings and stuff like that was probably good, but yet even with David, they consider that to be bad because of the anointing.
Yeah. And I think part of me goes, if it's just a unique thing for Saul, that's my only thought would possibly be, but also that David has a deeper understanding of it than we do, to be like, hey, so my guess is if you do rebel practically against God's authorities, there you can, it is good, but there's also how you're supposed to do it. There's a way to do it.
And some random dude doing it to Saul was not acceptable.
That random dude doing it to Saul. I don't know if that random person was an Israelite or not.
Yeah, I don't recall.
Yeah. Because, yeah.
Yeah, it's also find interesting on here what it talked about, living as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. You would almost think that'd be obvious. Don't use your freedom to cover up evil. That's not how Christians are supposed to behave. I think there's probably more to it than that, but that's that. The way where you first read them, why are you even saying that? Obviously, we're not supposed to cover up evil, or not supposed to do stuff to cover up evil. Although I think also the honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor sounds it sounds like it's supposed to be a slogan.
Yeah. I'd go with that right there. So looking probably for the part of like live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover up for evil, but living as servants of God. Like in that paragraph, this is during the Roman time period, so a lot of people will be like, "Oh, you're supposed to be like worshiping the Roman emperor because he's supposed to be a god," and Peter here is writing that you are free, like you don't live this way, and so some people will be like, oh, I don't have to possibly like pay taxes, or I don't have to do these other things that say the emperor wants to do that is good, but you want to do something else that's evil, and you're like, hey, like don't do it to cover up something like evil. I'm getting jumbled up right there. But it's one of those things of the part where you probably say like, I'm thinking of people probably thought of it as, I think it's like the universal citizens or citizens of Earth. Have you heard of that?
Not sure.
It's practically that the whole Earth, that there's no nations, there's just like we're all citizens of Earth.
Okay.
So, for I am not under the jurisdiction of whatever government authority and such.
Mm-hmm.
But if I get in trouble, like you're denying my rights as a citizen of the world.
Right.
Like judges love those things when that comes out. They're like, no, you're under the jurisdiction of the United States. You're under the jurisdiction of Egypt. You're under the jurisdiction of India. It's like you still have to obey these authorities, but they would. I'm wondering if people would possibly be like, I can become a Christian. I don't have to be under the authority of the emperor, so I can do all these like things that I want, all these evil things. And Peter's like, no, that is not what you can do. Like, this is not like I'm no longer a citizen of Rome. You know that you would want to be a Roman citizen during the time period, but you're not under the authority of Rome. But he's saying like no, this is not how it works. This is like you're a servant of God, which means what I just mentioned about honoring all the human institutions, you're still to do that. This is not a get out of jail free card for all that.
Right. I wonder if the other idea is, it says not using your freedom as a cover up for evil. If the idea is that you're doing something that is, it's not illegal there. Like they don't technically have it as a law. This is a bad thing. Mm-hmm. And so for you could say, well, if anyone were to speak up against what you're doing, like say in the church, it's like, well, the law doesn't have an issue with this. They say, well, you know it's still evil. God sees this as evil. So don't be covering, don't be making an excuse for the law for something that God has already said it's a problem. Mm-hmm. That could be another way that this is referring to that. Because that would be like, if the law doesn't have that, then that would be a freedom for you to do, according to the law. But you know that God doesn't actually. This is not living as a servant of God. This is not what God considers moral or good moral.
Or it could be the thing I believe in Romans 6, where it's like, oh, you have grace and such, like, because I can keep on sinning so grace shall abound.
Mm-hmm.
This Paul's like, no way. And Peter is saying the same thing here of like, yes, you are free, but that freedom is not freedom to do evil.
As in possibly when it says to cover up for evil, it means like I can just ask for forgiveness.
Yeah. It's like, for that, Paul's going like, I can just ask for forgiveness. And here's, you're like, I'm free, like, because of what Jesus has done. I can do all these things. It's like, no, that's not what we're going for here. This is not what the freedom is, not a cover up for evil.
Right. So here's the next interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
It says, servants, be subject to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the unjust. For this is a gracious thing, when mindful of God, one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. So what makes this interesting to me is that verse 13 makes an assumption that they're doing good, that they're praising good and punishing evil. They're not making that assumption. They're actually telling you, even if they're not doing right, you're supposed to be subject to them. So I find the contrast interesting.
I do say that's kind of like interesting because from like Peter, he would be like the Pharisees and such. During the time period of Jesus' execution would be like, these are the authorities, but they're also doing evil and such. You'd ask like, okay, what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
But like, yeah, the part where the servants are, there's presumption that there's good and bad masters.
Right.
And the other ones, like the authorities, are in position of good.
Right. I mean, you almost think that he would say also for the human institutions that, let's say, whether or not they're doing good or evil, if they're being, good or gentle, just or unjust, you still respect them. But they're not making that assumption. But they do make, they make the assumption that they're actually doing right. But in this, they're actually making the assumption. They're not making the assumption. They're just saying, regardless, handle this thing this way. So why is he saying differently for the human institutions, but for the masters to handle things differently there?
Yeah. So my question would possibly be kind of in verse 15 where it says, for this is the will of God, that by doing good you should be put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. And then the 14 is, and to governors is sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. So my part is there for, got a sneeze coming. My part is the in between, for this is the will of God. Is that in reference to the governors and emperor, or is this for us to do good in these situations? Because that part right there is probably one is just a simple command for us to do, and an insight of what, like,
you're saying that verse 15, perhaps 16 might be a section of it in and of itself?
yeah.
Okay. So saying this is the will of God may not be suggesting that he's talking about how the human institutions are going to be behaving.
So if the will of God is for us to do good, so you can put the silence of ignorance of foolish people, that right there is this is what the emperor is supposed to do. and we're supposed to be subject, but for God's will is for us to be doing this while being subject.
So you're just saying that this is saying that we should be doing good
Regardless.
for this is the will of God, regardless of what they're actually doing.
Yeah.
So we may not even.
But we're still to be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution.
Well, okay, so I guess part of what I'm thinking is that you're not going to be subject to them if you may not be being subject to them if you're doing good.
Yeah.
Depending on what you're having to follow.
Yeah.
And I guess part of it could be also that the tricky part could also be that different Christians might have different ideas of what. Because good, to some extent, can be not relative term, but some people may have different ideas of what good can look like.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have that happening today. Different Christians have different ideas of how the institution handles things to be good or bad. And so you can see that what they're doing is bad and therefore not follow it. Because you think you're doing good by not following it.
Mm-hmm.
An interesting one could be like 3 to 4 years ago. Would be how, because one thing is that which is also what the core group title for us is. It talks about how we're never not to neglect being up together.
Mm-hmm.
And yet there's a point where they shut everything down, including churches. And so there's a question of, okay, so was that actually whenever they did that, and so we stopped meeting up together. Now, granted, people did meet up, in a sense, online, if you want to count that. That can be questionable. It was almost, and for some people, that was a hindrance to them. That it was not good enough that they need to be with people. Which kind of makes sense. That's how the church is supposed to be. But that there's people who, the churches agree to shut down. And so, if it is said in the New Testament that we are not supposed to neglect meeting up together, were we actually doing good or bad by abiding by what the government said to do of not meeting up together?
Yeah, I'd say that's like interesting because for it, like my thought is like believers were meeting up together, but we didn't have the huge church buildings that they did in the past at the same time. And so I would say like probably part of meeting up in like small sort of groups, small gatherings is probably for it's still good, but probably the part where you have like 1,000 people in a room.
What about 100 or 200? Because even the small churches didn't close down because of the government saying we need to close the churches down. Small churches closed up. Wasn't just big churches, but small, because everyone had the understanding that you weren't allowed to do this.
Yeah. And I think for that, the response we had that we had to go into the church for it, I think for myself, this is my opinion, was the church building was the wrong one. I would say it would have been better if we probably during the time we would have been like, hey, let's get like a family or 2 or 3 together just to meet up during this time and have that as a part of gathering together, have a few believers meet up to be like, hey, like, let's get about 6 or 8 people together to do this for gathering. I think the part of we have to have this church building for us to get together for it was like, yes, we're blessed in that way, but we should still be gathering together in those situations, have that part. But the part where in the case of the pandemic was that part right there was also part of the huge breeding ground for the pandemic. Whereas we like, oh, we could meet in like smaller sections right there, and we weren't willing to do that. Still trying to gather together. We just had to have the gathering together in just one certain way was, I think, the problem there. But the part where if it like we can't have it, I go with my neighbors to study would be a problem. I'd say more. Because would also put the argument that if gathering those situations, because I've heard people who were like, yeah, we have these situations and it was pushed for this, and COVID was, my grandma got sick and she died, and so because we pushed for it and all, and the people who said we have to be in the church building right there, and we're expressing a freedom that they had for it, but there was something else going on at that moment, the pandemic, and by using that freedom to force the church buildings to be open, to that to spread out the disease right there, was possibly doing an evil to them which caused harm.
That is one way to look at it.
Yeah.
I think there's different sides to how that whole thing worked out, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily that needs to be gotten into right now. That's not part of this point. But
Yeah.
I mean, that is one
That's
way.
a rant.
That is one way you could have. That is one way you could have done it. Was to have smaller groups to get together. I guess it depends on what would qualify as small.
Yeah.
Because I know, like, for instance, because part of the issue that you had was that, because it made sense to like have supposed to watch full of old people. That makes sense. At the same time, there's other situations where older people were affected by the fact that they couldn't be around people.
Yeah. Well,
So it was the whole thing was a crapshoot.
that was. We weren't thinking quite clearly right there, and then we have an idea. People put objections, and people get prideful, and people aren't thinking clearly. But for here, going to like the servants and such, we normally, I think some translations would probably have that slaves, bondservants, and such. right there. And that would be, for us, we would probably think more of like people who are employees and such. That's a modern thought that a lot of us do today, is that as being servants and slaves is the same day as being employees. And so for that part where we will endure people who are harsh and some people who are kind as our bosses, and we are still to do the work. And we're supposed to be and not begrudgingly do the work. And we might suffer unjustly.
Right. It was interesting with this is that he's talking about servants being subject to their masters. And, well, no, one of the things that is said is that, at least in the New Testament, that they don't discourage slavery. And apparently, actually, Paul does. Well, to some extent, he doesn't. He says that
Philemon? Is that the part?
No, it's not. It's actually in like 1st or 2nd Corinthians, I believe. It's like, I think it's like chapter 2, verse 7 or something like that. It's in parentheses. And what it's talking about is like, it does say, be subject to your masters. And then in parentheses it says, but if you're able to take advantage of being free, take it. And so, which I found interesting, because usually people they mention Philemon, but they won't mention other things like, it just seems like they're fine with this whole thing and whatnot. And the closest thing you get to is, him encouraging the master to let the guy go or at least be buddies with him, stuff like that. And then it actually turns out that Paul does encourage it. He just does it in a parenthesis that we never really bring up, which I found interesting. I was like, oh, so they do actually, it wasn't like there was, because usually the argument is, okay, they had a culture, they're stuck in their ways. Now we've progressed. And so now we can kind of, as in a sense, how you can pull away from the New Testament and say, okay, well, they just were stuck in their ways as a culture. They didn't know any better. Apparently, Paul did actually, Paul and I, I'm assuming others in there, they did actually understand more that, just because slavery was a thing, they had this understanding of, okay, you're made in the image of God, and therefore you don't have to be a slave if you can take advantage of it. And it would be preferred, because the fact that he says take advantage of it would suggest this is a preferred thing. You're not a slave. So, but just don't be begrudging if you can't do that.
Yeah. I'm guessing that might be a similar vein of when Jesus spoke, when the Pharisees and Sadducees were talking to him about marriage and divorce, and Jesus was like, this was given to you because of your ignorance ways.
Oh, yeah.
It's like marriage is supposed to be between one man and one wife into one flesh. And the part there that it was given to them because he knows of how broken the world is. And for it, when he did it, he gave them boundaries and such for them to do, how to do it, to be as good as possible in those situations. But here in the New Testament, it's going, hey, it is not good for slavery, but it is in this world. It happens in this world, but the desire is to be without slavery.
Oh, yeah.
And the next part is,
it's dealing with Christ and how he suffered as an example for us.
Yeah. And 21, for to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. when he suffered. He did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. He himself bore our sins on his body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. For you were straying like sheep, but have now returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls.
Something I've heard that I find interesting along these lines, because it talks about how he did not revile or speak nasty in return to them, and also that he said that he was silent while they were saying wrong things and whatnot. But at the same time, I guess that there's something else that has been mentioned, was that just because all that stuff happened didn't mean he didn't challenge what they were charging him with, or challenging him, that he wasn't challenging the authorities on stuff. It's not like he wasn't completely quiet about the situation. Meaning, whenever Pilate was talking to him, and it had to do with him challenging him on what the truth was, and then Pilate responded with, "What is truth? What is truth? What's the big deal about truth?"
Mm-hmm.
And they were saying that Jesus bringing that up was actually him challenging him on what he was doing, which I found interesting. It's been a way of trying to explain that you don't always have to just take it. You can, to some extent, respond and challenge what they're saying. I'm not entirely sure how that fits in with he would, how I believe the passage goes. Yeah, he's basically silent as he was, as like lamb going to the slaughter. He was like silent during the whole thing. He didn't speak up about it. So the fact, I guess, that he even said that, it was like, well, that's interesting. That would be pointed out, that not that it was going to change anything. He just was willing to speak up and challenge him. Okay, about the truth aspect of of the whole situation. So that, and because this whole thing, one of the things that I think that some people can find difficult with this is it's basically suggesting you should just be a punching bag. It's like sometimes I don't want to be a punching bag. It's like, well, he says you have to be, so shut up. So, and to some extent, I also tend to wonder if there is. Sometimes I wonder if it's a situational thing that you're also dealing with here. Because with the situation, it made complete sense that he was doing that. But does that mean you always behave that way whenever stuff like this is happening? It kind of makes it seem like that here, unless there's a misunderstanding of what's going on.
So part of it is like, you definitely part that you will endure suffering, but like for us to be the example, and the part where Peter kind of puts in here when he was like, he was reviled, he did not revile in return, or when he suffered, he did not threaten. For it's one of those things of like kind of attitude and I would say which what's evil is being done upon you, because he had no sin or deceit was found in Jesus. If that's in the suffering that you're doing, you're in that situation, and this sufferings are coming upon you, and it seems like there's sin being associated with how the suffering is being put upon you. If slander is being said against you, don't slander back. If you are possibly being harassed, don't harass back. It's a big thing of when it happens, don't let your response be sin.
Yeah. Were you done? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. And all that, it doesn't look like one of the things that is cautioning against is to challenge. Like if someone's saying stuff against you, to challenge them. It's not actually saying you can't like challenge them on what they're saying. They're just saying that, don't respond in sin by saying, if they call you names, you say stuff back at them. If they're slandering you, you don't slander back. You don't call them names and call them dumb or whatever you want to say. You don't do that, but it doesn't say you can't challenge what they're saying. Basically, you can't challenge the truth of whether or not what they're saying is true.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think about it, because the crucifixion aspect or the trial aspect was a very specific situation, and Jesus didn't always react that way to stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he wasn't always silent. He never, slandered people, but there was a number of times where people challenged him on stuff, and he would either answer a question or challenge them right back. There were different times where he challenged what they were saying to be whether it was true or not. So it's not like you have to be silent to your accusers. You can respond. You just make sure you don't respond in any sinful manner.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there is also another questionable thing of, which I've mentioned I think before, of and how Jesus has, not in this situation, but there's other situations where Jesus had responded to certain things, and it would seem as if he contradicted some stuff that Paul had said about love. Or if there's just a misunderstanding about it.
I remember you mentioned that
Yeah.
in one of our previous conversations. I don't think that is recorded, which is kind of the reason why we kind of made this right here. But that's probably a conversation for another time.
Oh yeah, just like
interesting right there, because for it, like the part where it's like, okay, you can like defend yourself, but also for be prepared just to entrust yourself to God and for him who justly, because in the end you might be like, I'm suffering right here, I'm not going to respond in sin, and then all this still carries out. That will happen at times, that you will have it where you're like, I'm not going to revile back, I'm not going to threaten, I'm not going to speak slander, I'm just going to say my part and do the best I can to speak truth, and the suffering still comes and might be even worse now. So
the suffering that when they say Christ also suffered, do you think that they're specifically referring to during the trial and persecution, or do you think that they're referring to his life? I assumed it was the trial and persecution, but he did suffer throughout his life. I mean, he even warned people, I don't have a place to sleep and stuff like that. I don't have a bed to lay on. I mean, it was suffering. He was like, he didn't have a cushiony life. And there's plenty of other situations where it was suffering. He was having to deal with people who were saying things about him and said he wasn't, he was the devil. I mean, he suffered.
I think it's probably in a way both, because if you look at like his death, the part where later on he said he bore our sins in his body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed.
Mm-hmm.
That is, for me, giving more of the idea of this is the trial, the part where he was betrayed, he was flogged, he was in the crucifixion right there. That is the idea that I'm getting. But you can also carry that part where the part where they were calling him the devil, and you're like looking at the larger scale of he's God, he made himself man, and he's like, I created you, and I'm having to be with you as you're insulting me as I have given you this life. I have to suffer you reviling me. So that's, for me, a thought right there of like suffering there. But I think the main focus is the suffering of the crucifixion.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, I just know also that part of the idea is that his whole life is something we're supposed to be emulating. And like he gave an example of what it is to live the perfect human life. And so he's the image of that. And so we're supposed to emulate that whole image. And so that was part of what he was doing throughout his life. He's like, follow what I did, follow what I've done. And so, but he also suffered throughout his life. So I'm kind of wondering if, I think that obviously, I mean, the crucifixion, the fact they put in here, that would make sense because that's part of his life. That was a key thing. But I'm wondering if that's just an included aspect of what they're referring to. But I don't know. I mean, the first thing I would think of has to do with him being on trial and being persecuted right before he's going on the cross. But maybe not. I'm not sure.